Today, we talk about next.js. It's not previous, it is next. I'm just kidding. All right, so let's go ahead and we're going to open up Excalidraw and we're going to talk a little bit about how, I'm getting some tea, but we're going to talk a little bit about how React works. And this is the React that you already know and are familiar with, but now we're going to talk about it maybe a little bit deeper, so that way you understand a little bit more of what's going on. Okay, so we're going to start with React. And when I say React, I don't mean the library React. I mean specifically if you create it with like Vite or create React app or something like that. Or what's another one? I think some people do it in Parcel, and I think some people have done it in, it's called Snow something. I don't know. But anyways, there's a few different ways of spinning up React apps. We're going to call this, overall, we are going to call this client side. Okay? Client side React is what we, when we say this is client side, this is what we mean. Okay? So I'll even say client side React. All right. In a client side React app, what happens is this. You create an HTML page that looks like this. We'll call it index.html. And on this page, it's very much just going to be some bare bones shit. It's going to look like, you know, your head, some stuff in the head. Then you're going to have the body. And then you're going to have the stuff in the body. And then you're going to have usually a div with an ID of root. Something that looks like this. Nothing fancy. Let's see if we can find an HTML one. Come on, HTML. Where art thou? Where art thou indeed? HTML. Then, in another part of your code, you have a, make this yellow for JavaScript. A JavaScript file. And this JavaScript file says, hey, my root equals, actually, I'll put that down there. Your root equals doc.query selector. And I didn't write it all out just for the sake of space. And we're going to say root. Yeah. Okay. This is my root. And then I don't remember what the actual method is. But somewhere in here, you're calling a method that looks like, you'll say React DOM dot render. And in this root, you are going to render your app. Does that make sense? In other words, whatever your React app is, you're loading it into this element right here. Let's look at it. I'm going to open up. Just going to create a new one, create v.latest, and we're going to call it test React TypeScript. Okay, so just to prove this, when I go in here, I go to my source, I go to my index.html. That sure looks really similar. Oh, I forgot to mention one thing. You also have in here oh, what the fuck did I just do? Also in here, you have a script tag that runs. Script. And oh, this script just loads that JavaScript project, that JavaScript file. Does that make sense? This one. That's it. And all it does is it loads this one and gets it to run. Okay? This is pretty much it for client-side React. This is how it works. The rest is React takes over inside of this div. Your whole React project loads inside of this div. And that's how React loads when you do it client-side. Any questions so far about client-side React? Cool.
I guess one, I just want to get when you say client, I just want to verify I have a good understanding of that. Client means on their machine. Is that a good way to put it? Or
Yes. This
okay.
they're basically what you send to the user from a backend. It's not really a backend. So actually this is probably an important thing to discuss real quick. There's a couple of types of backends that are technically backends that we don't, or one major type of backend that we don't really call a backend is CDN, a cloud distribution network. Now, I don't work with this stuff that aggressively, so I'm not going to give you a by the textbook definition. But basically, the way to think about what a CDN is it's a content distribution network, and it's like as a computer, this is a dog shit computer. It's not like you can store stuff on it. It's not like you can, or store a lot of stuff on it. It's not like you can do a lot of calculations. It's not like you can do a bunch of complex shit. This basically just has the same file everywhere and it just serves it really fast. So this will have some, actually, I'll just scroll over and get my HTML file and serve it here. So this is not like a real backend, but what it is it's very distributed so you can send things out quickly. But basically this CDN just, when you make a request to whatever.com, it's just going to poop out this HTML and send that to you. And that's all that it sends, that HTML. This HTML then, though, it loads up the whatever CSS you have, which actually sometimes happens inside of the script tag, believe it or not, through React. But it loads up this, it's going to load up this script tag, and this script tag is going to execute the JavaScript. Does that make sense? So it's not really a proper backend, but basically what happens is this backend basically just poops out this HTML file. We're going to call it a CDN. The CDN poops out the HTML file. Any other questions on that?
Was that it? You said there was a couple. Was it just CDN you wanted to go over?
Yeah. The other thing that we do normally, and there's a few different flavors of it, is like a more proper server. So, sorry, good call. So we also have a server, which is like a real computer. Like this is like, or some version of a real computer. Basically, a real computer. What does that mean it can do? It can do shit like store files. It can calculate shit in like crunch numbers. It can.
The way I was told the server is it's the same as a computer. The one distinction is that it has to listen first.
Sure, I like that. That's a good. Yes, listens. That's fair. To be fair, though, a CDN listens too. So I'm in the context of describing the difference between a CDN and a server. Like a CDN also does that in the sense that you ask for data from a CDN. But yeah, that is correct. Like the thing that makes it a server is that it's listening for. That makes sense. I mean, I don't know like by the definition what is a server. This is like my
also
of it. Just
a CDN you generally have multiple CDNs in a server. Like that's kind of how you can set them up, which is really nice if you send.
I don't know that that's the
bunch
correct
of
way of
things that
thinking
way.
about that. Like a CDN, I don't know. I could be wrong. I'm not a CDN expert, but my understanding is that like if you actually look at what a CDN is, it is a distribution of computers. It's like a bunch of them, and they are low-powered computers. So, for example, let's say this is my terrible map of the United States. There's Florida, there's Texas, there's California, whatever. There's my terrible map of the United States. A CDN might look something, and I could be wrong, but it looks literally like a web connecting everything. And this is the most terrible web you've ever seen, but whatever. It's like a web of connecting stuff. Whoops. And basically what a CDN does is it handles, if I say, hey, store my HTML file on this CDN, what it does is it takes that HTML file, and this is kind of what it's built for. It takes that HTML file and it copies it to all these areas. So that way you can get it somewhere local wherever you are. So the whole point of this is that it's high availability for a small amount of resources. Does that make sense? That's my understanding.
Yeah, so like a server would have parts of a CDN. Like you would have it on a bunch of different places, and the server could have multiple bits. Like that's the way that you can do it. That's how distributed networks work, is that you have a bunch of you have dedicated space on multiple people's servers where you can, if you own the server, you have a bunch of stuff that you want from the server.
Yeah, and my understanding is the way that this stuff works is super complicated and it depends a lot on the company that you're going to. And like
Yeah.
how they choose to store it is very complex. And then it's like also like, yeah, like this file where it exists, it might be on its own server, but it also might be a part of a server that you share with a bunch of other people or something like that. It's all
Yeah.
really complicated, and all these companies kind of do it their own way, from what I understand. And I don't know anything about it, so I'm not going to speak on it. But it sounds like as long as you kind of understand that it's not a computer, it doesn't do all the full things that a server does. It basically is meant for distributing a small amount of shit. People use CDNs for things like you can use it for stuff like chunks of videos, you could use it for stuff like photos, you could use it for stuff like HTML files, CSS files, JavaScript files, and it's just a way of storing those things. But what it's not is like storing a bunch of business logic and stuff like that. Does that make sense? So anyways, this kind of stuff, client-side React, this basically goes to a CDN, and that's how it gets to the person. Meanwhile, a company, what they'll do if they have a client-side React app and they still need a server, what they'll do is they'll make a totally separate app for their, backend, basically, and that will be their server. And then what they'll do is from this little HTML file, this loads up on a person's computer, and this HTML file will hold all the JavaScript and all the data that it takes to fetch stuff. But it only knows to fetch that stuff after it's already gotten to the user. Does that make sense? Cool. So I want to, before we move on, my question is, what might be good or bad about this? I want to try to pull apart some presumptions about the end result of spinning up an app this way and why we might have even created something like next.js. Like, what's the problem that you could imagine that arises from doing it this way? A problem that might need to be solved.
Performance and security were
Why
big 2 ones.
performance? What does that mean?
From what I'm understanding so far, just how things are rendered in like a
What do
React
you mean
app,
by
like
that?
talking about a client. What was that?
What do you mean by that? How things are rendered? I'm confused.
Oh, so yeah, what's a good way to put it? So it's all in a client React app. It's pretty much it's all rendered at build time. If I'm understanding
Love
that
it.
correct.
Yes.
And then with like something with Next.js, you can choose to either statically or dynamically render your content and really get more intricate about when
Sure.
you want something to render. And yeah,
I
go
want to
ahead.
dial in a little bit more on this so we make sure we understand it. Rendered at build time. What do you mean by build time? Let's
From
see.
build to from what I understand, and I love this because that's something I need maybe some clarity on. Well, from what I'm understanding, build time is when someone not like when they visit a page, but when they load your app.
Yes. In other words, build time is Johnny in California says, hey, let me get this app. Cool. And now I'm going to take this app. I'm going to read it. We're going to say, hey, let's read everything on here. And then what we're going to do is, if there's some instructions, make those fetch calls, make any necessary fetch calls. Then if we get those fetch calls in, when they come back, that's so cool the way the arrow moves. Look at that.
Yeah, I saw that.
When they come back, render that data on the front end. Okay. Here's the problem with this. When you look at how this actually happens in real life, let's say this is the client and this is the server. This is the CDN. I'll just do another one of these. Make them different colors. Server, CDN. And then this is the document. Okay, let's say we have a document where we have a title and we have a bunch of boxes that we fetch from somewhere. Let's say that these are like character cards or something like that. Okay. For now, this is a fine demonstration. Okay. So, very first thing, a user goes and logs into a CDN or sends a GET request to a CDN. That CDN comes back, gives me this HTML file. Okay. Then, so first, ask for HTML file. Okay. Then we have to load HTML file. So when we first start out, I'm going to take this stuff and move it down here. When we first start out, we have this. Then we load the HTML file. So we get the title back on, right? Then in that HTML file somewhere, we are going to ask for data. So I'm going to say ask for data. That's this step. And actually, we should say, let's make this a little better. This is the CDN responds with HTML file. Then we load the HTML file. Then we ask for data, which then the server responds with data. Hopefully.
Yeah.
Then we load the data. Okay. So this is the server responding with data. And then we load that data. So the way that this looks is when we ask for data, no UI change. Then when the server responds with data, after it responds with data, then we load this. Here's the thing. Each of these steps take time. Okay. So like, let's call this step 1. This is step 2. Step 3 is like a rendering thing. So we're not going to worry about that right now. Step 3 is going to be ask for data. Step 4, is going to be get the data back. All of this could take like 700, 800, 900 milliseconds or something like that. You never know how long each of these takes. This usually happens pretty quick because CDNs by design are quick. This is not necessarily quick. So that means that when you load up this page, there is a second, potentially like a full second, maybe 2 seconds, maybe 3 seconds. Who knows? It can really happen. There is time, though, where there's no data on this page. And what you'll usually do during that time is you will render a loading spinner, which this is the ugliest loading spinner I've ever seen. But whatever, that's fine. Okay. This can be bad for a couple of reasons. What are those couple of reasons?
Just from a UI standpoint, user experience.
Yeah, it's not a great user experience. I agree. What else?
Asynchronous nature of it means that you can sometimes not get all of it in the right order, and it can really mess up your render too.
Yeah, you could not get all of it in the right order. I would say that there's pretty well-founded solutions for that. I wouldn't stress too much about that.
Well, I mean,
it's possible.
like you not getting it or not getting it what you expect, those types of things from your server too.
Yeah, that's possible. I'm trying to think of how big of a factor that is, but yeah, that's totally possible. It's also, yeah, it is something to manage for sure. It is true. Okay, what else though? There's a couple more things, I think. There's a big one that's a 3-letter acronym that you hear in the tech industry, particularly with like building websites all the time.
I'm thinking.
Starts with
I
an
don't
S.
Are you saying like SEO is bad?
SEO. This is bad for
Yeah,
SEO. Yeah.
You don't have data for it to index.
Yeah, let's say in here I have a character card, or I'm supposed to have a character card, or eventually, that's what I'm gonna phrase it. Let's say on here, eventually I'll have a character card for Rick Sanchez, and it'll say Rick Sanchez is the main protagonist in Rick and Morty. And he's kind of a dick. Let's say I have that on a card in here, and I want this information to be something that Google picks up on. If this doesn't load immediately when this page loads, Google is not going to know that this is on the page. So it's not going to be able to query for that information. So the more information that's on the page when it first loads, the better the SEO goes. Tends to be.
Little
Yep.
off topic. I noticed it might be my machine. But I noticed like working with Next, it runs really slow. Is that maybe just a performance on my machine issue, you think? Or is
Probably a
that
performance on your machine issue, but I could be wrong.
okay? I was just wondering maybe because I mean,
Are you on an M1 yet? Or are you
not
on
yet. I'm looking right now. I'm looking at I need to buy something
Yeah,
next
I
few
would
days.
guess it's a performance on your machine.
For sure.
Now we'll run differently. You will notice different things than with React. Okay, so I feel pretty confident that we understand this client model. Now we have to understand the Next.js model, why it's different, and what benefits we get from it. Okay, so with Next.js, there's a few benefits you get. Oh, by the way, something I didn't talk about here is auth makes the whole loading thing worse. Where the fuck? Auth makes the whole thing loading thing worse. In other words, if we have auth, we're gonna have to make 2 trips to either our server or some server, because you have to auth in first and then you have to ask for the data again. So like, for example, let's say I want to ask for my favorite characters. Well, first I have to auth in to know who I am, and then I have to have the logic here to make another fetch call to get that data. Does that make sense? So just so you know, this problem gets exacerbated by auth. For sure. Okay.
Is that a benefit of Next? Does Next help with that?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because in Next, you give it auth on the request. Yes, it has to go back and forth between the database, but it has to do that anyways. So something I didn't dump in here that I should probably. We're going pretty thorough on this lesson. Is that also keep in mind, this server often is not exactly located where the database is. So for each of these calls, it's also technically going to and from the database. This will become a little bit important in the other one as well, but it's like this would also be 4 calls to the database too. That's important to kind of understand. Not super important. Like, it is worth noting these things take time too, right? Going to and from just the act of literally traveling an electric signal from the server to the database takes time. And then also sometimes querying data takes time as well. So both of those things take time. Okay. All right. Now let's talk about, I'm not going to call it Next.js. I'm going to call it whatever React meta framework. We're going to call this whatever React meta framework, or really whatever meta framework you're using. By the way, let's list some while we're here. What are some good meta frameworks that you've maybe heard of? If it's just Next.js, we can start with that. But there's other ones that might be
Svelte, React-ish.
Yeah.
Svelte kit specifically.
Yes, Svelte
Svelte
kit
is an alternative to React. Svelte kit is an alternative to
is
Next.js.
the framework.
Yep. Okay. Anybody know other ones? There's one that I use.
TanStack?
What?
TanStack?
Not quite. TanStack is for client-side React. Kind of. You can use TanStack on Next.js as well, but it lives on the front end to my knowledge. There might be something that he's done or doing that allows you to have code on the back end. And it wouldn't shock me if that comes out soon. But right now, I think TanStack is still client-side. I could be wrong. But
is Vue is as well, right? Vue is React-ish.
Vue is an alternative to React. Does anybody know what the Vue equivalent of Next is? Because there is one.
Oh, is there?
Yep. I'll give you a hint. There's only one letter different than next.js.
Oh, is it Nuxt?
It is
Or
Nuxt.
Nuxt? Yeah, I wasn't sure how you pronounce it.
Nuxt. Yeah, is how I've heard it pronounced at least.
And
Yeah.
Angular is very different, right? Or is it
I
back to
think
being
Angular
similar?
might already be that way, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
We'll pop some question marks in there because I don't know shit about Angular. But I feel like there's a
I-
very good chance it is. I think that there's a very good chance that Ember is, but I'm not sure. I'm not confident enough in it to say. I have friends that are Ember
Yeah.
developers though, and they fucking love Ember. And apparently it's been doing a lot of this stuff for a long time.
Well, I know that Angular did another big like ideology switch as well. So I don't know if the new one is
They did
this
something
sort of
I
meta.
know recently with signals, which is
Yeah.
that is not a back end thing, but it wouldn't shock me if Angular's server side. I don't know. I'm not gonna speak on it, but
Okay.
I don't know. Anyone else know? There's a couple more. Solid Start, and the one that I'm using on a big project I'm on is called Remix.
Oh yeah.
There's a few more in there. It doesn't really matter too much, but it's worth just knowing whatever the meta framework you're using is, they probably work via this model of hydration, what we're going to call it. And sometimes it will get called SSR. Technically, it's a little bit more specific than that, but usually we call it client side hydration. Okay. And I don't fully understand the mechanics about how all of it works, but understanding roughly how it works on like a skeleton kind of level is probably going to get you very far. Most people that use Next.js do not have a working understanding of how it functions under the hood. They just understand what it feels like to use, and that's okay. Okay. So in Next.js, what you have is, and there's all sorts of different mechanisms for getting this stuff to work. We're not going to talk about the mechanisms today. I could probably make a little demo and show it, but I'll show one mechanism, but there's 1,000 different mechanisms for doing this stuff with all these different frameworks. So we're going to talk about the general idea of how these work though. So we're going to create the same page. Title. And we're going to have these things, okay?
Okay.
A nice and easy one. When I make a request to the server this time, and I'm a client, we don't have a CDN anymore. There is none. The server now is instead of the CDN. Now, the server can be a distributed server, which might be confusing, but it is not a CDN. Okay. Then I fetch straight to here, and I get the data straight back. When I do fetch, I can add my auth credentials or whatever, right? This is important, right? So it'll know if I'm logged in on the first byte to this page. And on this server can now access a database. So now, if these represent my characters, I'll make a fetch request to the server. The server will say, who is this fucking guy? And they'll say, oh, it's Jon. Let's get Jon's favorite characters. And then let's return this here. And then now we're going to just give, rather than give just some data to the client, we're going to give them an entire HTML document that's already filled out. And this is where the magic of these meta frameworks come in, is and they all kind of work in different ways, but what they all do is they give you this entire thing by the time you fetch it. That's the whole point of them. And the whole point of them is to do it in a way that feels natural to React. That's it. That's all there is to it. That's all that they do. They give you the whole document. And then what they also allow you to do is change that document in a way that uses not quite just like JSON data. It allows you to update that in a fancy way. That's like the really modern stuff allows you to do that. This is it. This is what React meta frameworks are for. There's a lot of implications here that you may not process right now, but this is all that they do. They get data, they hydrate this shit. You can look up more detailed about client-side hydration or hydration web development. It's probably better. Each generated HTML is associated with minimal JavaScript code necessary for that page. When a page is loaded by the browser, its JavaScript code runs, making the page fully interactive. That's confusing. But the idea is that like you can hydrate like one of these sections or something like that with all the data that it needs. And then I think it also has context to do with how it updates and stuff like that. You don't need to stress too much about understanding it by the books. The important thing is you are sending full documents and you're pre-rendering them before you send it to the client. Okay, let's build something. And who's in here right now? Okay, so I'm going to build 2 apps. Well, I'll build 1 app. And we'll build a next app. So let's see. I suck at next, but we'll see how it goes. Next starter. By the way, one of the things we didn't talk about with security is where API keys live and stuff like that. For example, let's say you need a special key to fetch data like this. You have to do a whole sort of setup with a client-side app to where you fetch data as a user and then the back end has the key, but then you don't, it could be complicated sometimes because you don't necessarily know who's who, and then figuring out auth and stuff is tricky. And then you also have to do a lot of that code on the back end code, which is very separate from the front end code. Whereas when you have an API key in next.js, it makes a lot of those things a lot easier to do. Let me see if I can find a good API with, I wonder if there's a good example of an API with a key that I could think of on the spot. So let's see. Rapid API. I bet there's like a movie one. Let's see. Movie APIs. Movie quotes. Let's try this one. Okay. So here it gives me a key. So it needs an authorization header. Is the way that this works. Okay, so let me just show you what this looks like. If I take this code, I'm not going to do it with Axios. You don't need Axios. This will be fine. Okay, if I take this, I'm just going to go to TS Playground. And we're going to copy this. And we don't need Axios. We're just going to say, we're going to fetch to options.url. We're going to pass in options. And then we're going to take that response, convert it into JSON, and then we're going to console.log. Bad credentials. Is it giving me that here? Bad credentials. Oh, so I guess I have to go in probably to this API. How do I get an API key? How do I get the API key? Movie quotes website. Try this one. Let's see. Oh no, you have to pay. Never mind. No, thank you. Well, I want a free one. Free movie. And this one does not have an API key. Oh, yes, it does. I'm going to bet I can just copy this. Okay, we're going to try this out. Actually, is there a way for me to do it with JavaScript fetch. Ah, yeah. Now I don't have to do shit. There we go. Go back to that TS playground. Boom. Fetch it. Await is only valid. Okay, so we're just going to say fetch URL options response goes to response JSON. You are not subscribed to this API? Fuck you. How am I supposed to do that? Let's see. Oh, maybe I have to subscribe to... That's so annoying. I have to subscribe to Rapid API. I'm not going to do that right now. Maybe I do this. Do I have to pay? Okay, cool. We're good. All right, let's try it one more time. See what happens. Do. And it's bad. Cool. Well, this is not going smooth. Okay, Urban Dictionary. We'll try this. Test the endpoint. Cool. And now I get these random. Great. Urban Dictionary. Let's go. So what I could do is copy this code snippet. Fetch is what it should be. It'd be a lot easier. And if I go here, boom, boom. Well, I just need to copy the options. That's it. Boom. But
your URL. You need to grab the URL as well.
You're right. You're right. Yeah. Okay. The important part here, though, is that there is something bad in this code that I should never ever publish like in reality. And that is these API keys I never want to send to the user. One of the really nice parts about next.js, which we'll just go ahead and create one. I think I could just go npm create next app. Is that right? Oh, project name, we're going to call it Urban Dictionary. And would I like to use TypeScript? Yes. ESLint? Sure. Tailwind? Sure. Why not? Use the source directory? Sure. Would you like to use app router? Sure. Sure. Would you like your import alias configured? Sure. I don't fucking know. Let's go. Let's do it. And it's going to take a minute. This is a lot heavier of an application than a Vite application. There's a lot more shit that it does. So it follows suit that it'll take a little longer to spin up. And then when it does, let's open up our Urban Dictionary. Boom.
It's still faster than Create React app was too.
Oh yeah, Create React app fucking sucked. Okay, so now this is like my main page. Here's what's kind of cool. The way that next.js does this, and it feels super natural, and it barely feels like you're even writing backend code at all. This is what's kind of cool about it. I can have a server thing here. Let's get my API key. Actually, I'm just going to copy all this code. And I'm going to make a fetch call. We'll make a new file. I'll call it like API.ts. And in here, I'll export get random quotes. And in here, I'll just wrap a function around this. Boom, boom, boom. All this stuff is fine, except for I just need to return this. And I need to parse this. And I need to say what it is. I'm just going to say it's a promise that resolves to, which let's look at the shape of the thing that we get back. My understanding is it looks like it has a key of list, and then it's going to have a definition and a word. Cool. We'll just go with those for now.
I had to step away for just a second, so I missed it. What made you go with, I wanted to ask you this, I'm glad I saw it. What made you go with the app directory?
I don't know. I just know how to use it right now.
Okay, gotcha. Didn't know if it was because yeah, I know they asked that if you want to do source or app. What's the new way is app? Is the new way app?
Yes, that is
Yeah,
the
new
way.
way is app. Okay, never mind. Yeah, that's the way I'm doing it. Perfect.
So now that I have this, I have my API keys in here, but it's never publicly exposed to the client. For example, if I go here and I will just say const my quotes equals await get random quotes with async functions, and I think I could do this. Hang on. Give it a second. We're going to try it. And then in
Well,
here, we're going to say quote stop map. And we're going to say for each quote, I want to give a div with the key being the, does it have an ID on it? It's got, I don't see an ID. Def ID. So we'll call it def ID. So in here, I'll just add a def ID is a number, I think that's what it was. And now that I have this, I'll say my key is my def ID.
so in a regular client-side React app, you would those keys you'd usually store in your env, so you don't even need to worry about doing that here, or
I
wrong?
would say
Or
you should, but it's less important, but you still should, because
Okay.
here this is still publicly available on GitHub. But I
True
just want
that.
to show that it
Yeah.
doesn't show up. You can
Right,
still
right.
do it in your env, but it's easy to do in your env still. I actually want this to be, I want to get rid of this. I don't want this to be this. What I will do, say, here, this is gonna take a dot then. And hopefully if I did all this right, which there's a high liability that I made a mistake. And here I should be able to get my quote dot work. Okay. And if I do all of this, which we're going to see if it worked. Now when I run, on a second. There we go. Well, it looks like it gave me the same word over and over again. What happens if I just do quote dot definition? Did it just give me like all the same? Okay, so I just didn't know how this API works. But yeah. So what's cool about this is if I look at my network tab, let's see if we can find the fetch request to go get the quotes. Network, where's my list of stuff? Am I tripping right now? There should have been some fetch requests. What am I missing here? Come on. Something's weird. Why is it not showing up? I have some filter on. Oh, it's this filter. There we go. There it goes. Okay, so now I should be able to turn off. I should just be able to look for all my requests. And if you see, there's nowhere where I made a fetch call to the place that my backend did. Now, you're right. I still definitely want to make this more secure by going in here, making environment variables. So let's see. I'm going to just go. I don't remember exactly how to do environment variables in here. I don't know if it's like a .env.
It's the same. It's the
Okay.
same. Just
I think I'm
.env.
gonna just go .env. And then in here, what you would do is you would say, all right, let's get my paste this shit. I'm gonna have to reset my API key after this, which is fun. By the way, have you ever tried using Zod as a as a way of managing your API keys, Zach?
Not my API keys, but definitely everything you taught me is coming back up now. I mean, especially the way Vercel is recommending to do it is with Zod and Prisma.
Yeah, so you could do this.
Mhm.
I'm just gonna do Z. Well, you don't need Prisma for API keys.
No, but like for managing your Postgres database and all that with Vercel.
So in here now, what I could do is I'll get these API keys, get the key values, and now I'll say that this is a Z dot string, right? This is a Z dot string, which is just not happy because of these brackets. I'm sorry, because of the hyphenated. You just can't do that in JavaScript, so you need something more like this. Easy fix. And now that I have that sort of sorted, now what I'll do is I'll parse process.env. And that'll give me my environment variables, which means that now I could say my xrapid API key is going to be my env.xrapid API key. And my xrapid API host is going to be my xrapid. It's just a nice way of doing it. So now when I type in npm run dev, that process.env is type safe, and I still get the same shit. But now, if you look in my code base, and this is important, right? Nowhere in my code base, except for in this .env, actually has that API key. So there's nothing I could commit that would have that API key in here. And as long as I dump this in the git ignore, which I haven't done yet, which I need to do. So I'm going to go to my git ignore, and I'm going to add. I'm actually surprised they don't add it at default.
Yeah.
But it looks like maybe you're supposed to use next.m. No, maybe
Yeah, I think it does for your local environment. Like if you go back to your git ignore,
yeah.
there was a .env.
Oh yeah, it does. .env.local,
Yeah.
but it doesn't stop at .env. That's weird. Yeah, I'm not sure why they would do that, but whatever, it's fine.
Yeah.
Either way, yeah, that worked pretty well. Cool. I'm probably over right now. Also, I apologize, Stefan. It took me a little longer than expected. I am sorry about that. If you want though, at 5 I'm teaching another class where I will go a lot more into HTML, CSS stuff.
Testing.
I will give you. I'm gonna stop class on this one and give you some one-on-one time if you want, because I feel kind of bad for that one as your first